For those of you who've been to General Conference before, you might have wondered when you saw a whole group of people get up and leave the floor. You wondered what they were doing? Maybe you didn't, maybe you knew. Maybe what I'll say this morning will give some of you a clue as to what happens when those people leave the floor of General Conference. The Judicial Council became a part of the Methodist Church, one of the constitutional bodies at the Uniting Conference in 1939. In the history of the church, it's one of the newer constitutional bodies. Paragraphs 55 to 58 of the Constitution of the Church establish the parameters of the council. A constitutional body is different from agencies of the church. Agencies of the church may be formed, created, removed by majority action of the General Conference. Constitutional bodies require a constitutional amendment to either create or remove that constitutional body. That process of amendment is outlined in paragraph 59 of the Constitution. It involves 2/3 majority of both the General Conference and the aggregate votes of all the annual conferences. That process can take several years, and be aware of that as you come to General Conference when things relate to constitutional amendments. It doesn't happen overnight. Chapter 7 of the discipline is entitled Judicial Administration, and paragraphs 2601 to 2606 set forth the specifics of the election and membership of the Judicial Council. And that's one of the places that you, the members of the General Conference, interact with the Judicial Council. You elect those members. The council is formed of 5 lay and 4 clergy. At the end of the quadrennium, it will switch from 4 lay to 5 clergy. That happens on a regular basis. Members are elected for 8-year terms and may be re-elected for a second term. There's 6 lay alternates and 6 clergy alternates who are elected for terms of 4 years. The members and alternates, as I said, are elected by the General Conference. The Council of Bishops nominates 3 times the number of lay and clergy members to be elected, and there must be at least 1 nominee from each jurisdiction and the central conferences as a group. When the nominees of the Council of Bishops are presented on the floor of the General Conference, there's a time for nominations from the floor. The names of each nominee, the conference from which they come, and a biographical sketch of no more than 100 words must be published in the Daily Christian Advocate at least 48 hours prior to the election. The General Conference then elects, without discussion, without comment, by a majority vote, the members, followed by the election of the alternates. If you plan to nominate somebody from the floor, as a courtesy to the Secretary's office, have that person already provide you with a 100-word biography. Don't spring it on them from the floor of the conference. And once you've nominated that person, go immediately to the front and hand to the secretary or one of the assistant secretaries the biography, the conference from which the person comes, and the correct contact information for that person. That doesn't always happen, and so there have been times when we were hunting for for correct contact information. Sometimes alternates are elected, and that's when they contact the Judicial Council to see if they have the contact information. But that's a very important part of nominations from the floor. Paragraph 2608 provides that the Judicial Council does its own method of organization. They have developed rules of practice and procedure which are available. Normally, the council meets twice a year, spring and fall, but during General Conference, the council is in session the entire time. They're another one of those groups of volunteers, none of them receive any pay, who will be there from the beginning to the end. And actually, most of the time, they are there before General Conference meets because they have their spring meeting just prior to the convening of General Conference. Paragraph 2609 sets forth the jurisdiction and powers of the Judicial Council. One of them, which doesn't have too much effect on General Conference, is that the Judicial Council must pass upon every decision of law made by a bishop in a conference. It must either affirm, modify, or disaffirm, not affirm, that decision. That's according to the Constitution as well as paragraph 2609. The more pertinent part of the jurisdiction of the Judicial Council for General Conference is that you have to ask for the meaning, application, constitutionality, or effect of a piece of legislation before the General Conference. Now, this is one of the times that the Judicial Council can rule on proposed legislation. The Council of Bishops can request by majority vote in advance of General Conference for such an opinion. It only takes, once General Conference is convened, it only takes a 20% vote to send either proposed or passed legislation to the Judicial Council. The Judicial Council leaves, works on it. If you want to file a brief, you do that. If others want to file briefs, if you want to ask for an oral hearing, you can. But be aware that asking for an oral hearing can delay the process for several days. Once the Judicial Council receives the request, and what they receive is what is written on the piece of paper that's handed to the Secretary of the General Conference. Therefore, you need to be very careful to speak exactly the words which are on the paper. The Judicial Council can only deal with what's written on that paper. It's very important to keep up with that kind of thing because you could lose what you thought you said if you vary from that written paper. It needs to be done as soon after General Conference convenes as you can do it. In 2012, and some of you will remember that, people on the Judicial Council, and I as clerk certainly do, on Wednesday night before adjournment on Friday afternoon, the Judicial Council received a request for a very important restructure of the church. The Judicial Council worked literally 24 hours a day to get a decision before the General Conference prior to adjournment. Friday afternoon, there was finally a decision, and there was total silence in the room when it was announced. there was more than one part of that restructure which were unconstitutional. That left General Conference scrambling to see what they could do about it. That's why it's so important to do it early on. There's one other thing that you need to be aware of. The Judicial Council will be meeting just prior to the convening of General Conference. The docket for that meeting has not been published yet. It should be published very soon, but it hasn't yet. There may well be requests from the Council of Bishops on the constitutionality of proposed legislation in that request. So look carefully when that report of a decision gets made. Thank you for your time. I'll yield now, and I'll try to answer any questions you have.